Hello, my name is Ron Williams, and I am the CEO of Talent Companies. I spent 23 years in the United States Secret Service and retired and started Talent. We have three companies under the Talent Companies umbrella: Talent Executive Services, Inc., Talent Cyber Tech, and Secure Strategies International. Each one of them have different responsibilities, but they provide a seamless way to provide a host of security-related services. We're going to stay with the op-ed of that Talon is security. Don't be a sheep, be a lion. And today we're going to be talking about security risk vulnerability assessments, emergency response planning, and business continuity. All three different areas, but very important for companies and corporations to have these three elements. And I'm going to introduce my guest here in just a moment. But before I do, 9/11, when the World Trade Center was attacked by two passenger airliners, I know it was a horrific event, but the McKinsey report that came out afterwards basically said that those companies that had a business continuity plan for a traumatic terrorist attack like that survived, and those that did not survive. And what does that mean? It means that you have to look at your primary headquarters or your primary place of business and plan for the ability to move that business to a hot site, and that includes the IT, so that you can stay in business. And with that, I'd like to introduce my protege, friend, and working partner, Rick Hahn. He's retired from the F.B.I. after 32 years, and he has a master's degree in emergency management from Eastern Kentucky University. I myself have certification from Homeland Security. So with that, I'd like to introduce Rick Hahn.
Good morning, Ron. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Good. As you said, today we're going to talk about different things: vulnerability assessments, policies and procedures assessments, emergency response planning. But all of this falls under the category of business continuity. And the way I think of it is business continuity, having a business continuity plan requires the same thing as a really good, strong table does. It requires 4 different legs. And if I can, let me describe what I mean by that. The first leg in a continuity plan is to have a vulnerability assessment. And that means a study of what things really make your business tick. What assets do you have? And when we come in from Talent to do this sort of thing, we look at the assets, we talk to the management, we talk to other key personnel, and we evaluate and prioritize what assets the company has, including their supply chain, so that we have a real good idea, and they end up with a real good idea of what are their most important assets to be able to pick themselves up after some sort of disaster and start business again. So that's the first thing we do, and that takes a good deal of time, but it also gives them an idea of what their main assets are and where they should put their money in terms of protecting those assets. The second leg is a review of the policies and procedures. And that includes examining who has access to your facilities, where they have access, what sensitive areas there are, areas with proprietary information that must be protected. It includes examining every person from the cleaning crew to the copier maintenance person to new hire employees. And Ron, I'm going to pitch it to you to kind of tell a little story about a chip maker in Southern California that suffered a compromise as a result of a new hire from China. Ron?
Well, when it comes to protecting assets, I've identified, and it comes from the experience being in the Secret Service running the financial fraud unit in Los Angeles. One of the major vulnerabilities is insider threat. And I call it the invisible ghost, but the janitors. Companies hire a janitor firm. Crooks know that if they hire on as a janitor and they're servicing a major client, that at 10, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night, they're the only ones in the offices, and allows them to go and look through the desk and in some cases go on the computer and steal proprietary data information. The insider threat, I'll give you an example of that. We did an investigation a number of years ago for a credit union that I'm not at liberty to advise. We signed NDAs. And what we discovered was 6 people in the credit card department that issued the cards had been selling that kind of information out to gangs in Inglewood. And the company sustained about a $3 million loss. So those are some of the things that we look at, and we look at insider threat. We look at the janitor system, how you effectively keep people out of your business late at night. And those are just some of the things that we take into consideration when we're doing. And I'm going to toss it back to Rick, what we call design basis threat, because we use our experience to design threats against the company that we think are viable. And Rick, you want to carry the football on that?
Sure. One of the things that we look at, of course, is your hiring practices. What kind of screening do you do, not only for the contractors that come in, like the janitorial service, but even your employees? And I know that there's at least one case in Southern California where a Chinese student was hired and apparently compromised proprietary information as a new hire, and basically drove that business out of business by feeding the information back to China to a competitor, and the competitors started undercutting the pricing on the product and just basically drove them out of business. So we look at all of these things in terms of policies and procedures, including the HR people and what kind of screening they do for new hires. So let me move on to the third leg of the threat assessment, which is to look at what threats are both natural and man-made are in the environment that this company operates in. And this could be anything from flooding, fire, earthquakes, blizzards, cold or hot temperatures. We examine all these things, not just for the client, but also for the client's supply chain. Because as we're seeing today with new car manufacturers are slowing down their factories because they can't get the chips, the silicon chips that they need to put into those cars to make them work the way they're supposed to work. So we look at all that, And then we talk to both state and local officials to look at threats like, are there gangs in the neighborhood? Is there a terrorism threat? Um, is there extortion going on in the neighborhood? What about homeless people, even just homeless people gathering on your site looking for a place to make an encampment? All those things we evaluate, we look at them, we determine what the threats are in your environment, and look at and rate what the likelihood is of some of these threats occurring. And this is something that really needs to be considered. Now, I would point out that in the 9/11 events that Ron made reference to, of course, the two twin towers, World Trade One and World Trade Two, came down. But on the other side of the plaza was what they called World Trade 8. And World Trade 8 had the New York City Emergency Response Center in it. And it was destroyed by the falling of those towers. And so New York City had to find a new place to set up and overnight create a emergency response center, which they did out on one of the piers in the East River. So it's all these things are evaluated. You know, if your company is somehow threatened by earthquake or fire or flood, something like that, where do you go to set up your response to that emergency and continue to operate as best you can? So that's all part of the examination of what threats are out there and how viable are those threats, how likely are those threats to occur. And again, we rate these things based on the historical records, you know, whether it's earthquakes or wildfires or floods. So, Ron, you want to comment on that at all?
Yeah, yeah. When you were talking about the individual that brought down the company, it reminded me that we were hired to do a security risk vulnerability assessment and a security plan, and hire security guards and do the whole 9 yards for this new company that had been backed by some very, very high investors on the East Coast. And so when we went into the company and we started interviews and looking around, I noticed that there were a lot of national Chinese in this company, and they had a lot of top secret, trade secret information. This company was specifically designed to do business with the military. And so we sat down with the CEO and CFO of the company when we were almost done with our security risk assessment. And we pointed out to him that the Chinese had stolen a lot of technology, and not to put stock in allowing them to be privy to some of the trade secrets and information. At which time the CEO informed me that they trusted all of the employees, including the Chinese that came over from national China. What happened and what occurred within 6 months is that the Chinese had duplicated all of those products, went back to China, were selling them for half the price, and it drove this company out of business. And I know that that's the one that Rick is talking about. We gave the company solid advice on how to handle and put all of the trade secret and top secret information into files, and to audit those files and to deny access to those files by people that were not approved to be in those uh, to open those files. They didn't take our advice, and there, the company, it was sadly went out of business. So that's one of the key things that we that Rick and I take a look at is when you're talking in terms of vulnerability, you look at convergence, and that is physical security with cybersecurity. And it's a seamless product because you can't have one without the other. And I give you an example. In 2003, well, the United States had arrested Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the man who orchestrated the 9/11 bombings. We arrested him in Pakistan, and they waterboarded him about 185 times. But the reason I bring this up is that when they started taking a look at who Sheikh Khalid Muhammad was, he was a water engineer, and he had plans on how to contaminate the water and how to bring the water districts down. And so Rick and I did over 30 water districts security risk vulnerability assessments. And we finally convinced one of the water districts to incorporate IT security, cybersecurity in our evaluation. And it sounded an alarm back in DC because we found a malicious application on the system that would allow somebody to come in, use an administrative code, and to manipulate the chemicals in the water. They could shut down the pipes, let them stand for about an hour, and turn them on full blast and blow up the pipes. So those are all things that, when we take a look at a vulnerability risk assessment, we try to marry up the cybersecurity also. And then obviously what Rick is talking about is a viable emergency response plan. I can recall going up to the Bay Area to do a security risk vulnerability assessment. Rick and I went up there. This has been years ago, and I'm sitting with the director of human resources. And I asked him what kind of backgrounds they did for employees being hired by the water district. And he looked at me and he said, "We don't do background checks." I said, "What? This is a critical infrastructure. You have to do background checks." He said, "The board does not want to infringe on the civil rights of people that come to work for the water district." And I thought, wow, that's allowing the fox into the hen house. And I just shook my head. I couldn't believe it. But those are some of the things that you come up on when you're doing one of these assessments. So, Rick?
Well, I'm glad you brought up the cyber aspect because, again, as I was saying, a business continuity plan is like a table with four legs, and the fourth leg is, of course, cybersecurity. In this day and age, there's nothing more insidious than a hacker penetrating your servers and stealing email, stealing proprietary data. It's all possible, and despite the fact that most corporations take the Democratic National Committee, for example, DNC. I mean, they had somebody in there for months before they stole and released those emails. Or take, for example, all you have to do is look it up on the internet, what happened to Sony Pictures. Sony Pictures had in production a movie that made fun of Kim Jong-un, the premier of North Korea. And as a result, the North Koreans destroyed probably tens of millions of dollars of Sony equipment, their servers. They wiped their servers, they blew up their computers. They just caused complete havoc. And it probably, nobody knows exactly, but it probably took them more than a month to rebuild. And I don't know that they ever had any sort of backup. And that's another thing that, again, looking at the cybersecurity aspect of things, is you have to just like you have to have an emergency operations center that's off-site, remote from your normal location. You also have to have a cybersecurity location where your data is stored. Um, as you know, Ron, we're both reading this book called Sandworm, which I would highly recommend, but it details how Russian hackers basically attacked the Ukraine and took out the electricity in the whole capital city of Kiev, not once but twice. And when they investigated it, they found that they had been in their system for months and gathering data like password names and where certain controls were. And they were even able to make it appear on screens that monitor the electricity that everything was normal, when in fact they were shutting down different transformers across the country. So there's nothing more insidious than that. And unfortunately, it's something that is such a specialized field that I'll be the first to admit, I don't know a lot about it. I'm going to rely on experts like Helen Cyber to tell me what's going on here. All of this, I'm sure, sounds like, wow, these guys want to come in, they want to put handcuffs on everybody, they want to, cage things off, and certainly we would be remiss if we did not point out the vulnerabilities that we find. But on the other hand, we are tuned in to the needs and desires of the client. And so the client says, look, we don't want to screen, we don't want to do background investigations on our employees. Well, okay, but we advised you. But there are different technologies that we're very much aware of. Everything from facial recognition. If you don't want people wearing badges, hey, since you've got cameras all over the place, let's put some facial recognition in there. And anytime a person that is not recognized shows up on the screen, let's make it alert to your own security department so that they are aware that they've got somebody on the site that they don't know who that person is. It's not an employee. It's not a normal contractor that comes and goes. Who is that person? There are big companies that do very sensitive work that we've done some work for, that allow the community to come into their space. And once they're in their space, they can wander about. It's just contrary to good common sense. But again, we are specialists. Ron and I and our colleagues have all worked in the security field for years and years, and we think differently. We look at those sorts of things and try to both meet the needs of the client and at the same time point out to the client exactly what those vulnerabilities, the consequences can be. And as Ron was saying, the one business in Southern California got driven completely out of business by simply not properly screening the new employees. So we do design things to meet the client. The last part of this is that included in the studies that we do, the vulnerability assessment, the cyber assessment, we then make recommendations. And again, those recommendations are going to be based on the client's desire. And an awful lot of clients want this, quote, open campus sense about their workspace, and that's fine. But again, there are technologies out there that can be applied that are non-intrusive. We're not asking everyone to have an iris scan or a fingerprint scan. Hey, you know what? I go to a gym almost every day of the week, and I have to do a fingerprint scan to get into the gym. So I'm not afraid of it. But again, a lot of clients just want that open campus kind of feel. But there are technologies out there that we can apply, and that's the sort of thing we recommend. Ron, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, one of the things that we also do at the end of our assessment an emergency response plan is to provide the company with tabletop exercises, wherein we go in, you get the key employees that are responsible for the emergency response. And by the way, in the emergency response plan, everybody has a role that's defined by the emergency response plan. But what you do with a tabletop exercise is basically provide them with scenarios that they have to solve. And it's a step-by-step program. In other words, we did a major tabletop exercise for Kauai Water District, and we did one for Fresno Water District. And what we did is we throw a curveball. The morning of the tabletop exercise, we took key managers out of the program, saying one is on vacation, the other one's sick, and so this caused the underlings to have to make these decisions, and then you walk through these scenarios and sort of grade them on their response, and it's a pretty enlightening session when you do a tabletop exercise. So, Rick, you want to comment on that?
Well, you're exactly right, and of course, one of the things that we emphasize is using the tabletop exercises at least once a year, and depending on what kind of business you're in and how big your business is, it may even be required by law that you have at least an annual tabletop exercise. And those, the problem, of course, is that if you have an emergency response plan, you have a business continuity plan, having it sitting on a shelf doing nothing has no value whatsoever. You have to exercise that plan. As Ron was pointing out, part and parcel of the vulnerability assessment and the report that we generate is to have an emergency response plan that designates specific people to specific roles. And this all follows the national emergency response plans that call for exactly that, so that a fireman from Oklahoma could go into the emergency response plan emergency response center in New York City, and he could say, I'm the PIO, and they know exactly what that role is. He knows what the role is. He's just in a different location taking different data and putting it out as the public information officer, PIO. So if you don't exercise it, it's like fire drills. If you don't do them, guess what? Come the time that there's actually a fire, you're going to have mayhem. So you have to work these things just like getting your exercise in the gym sort of thing. You got to work those muscles. You got to work those plans too. Ron?
Yeah, we've had a number of enlightening, successful programs doing the tabletop exercise, and the feedback has always been in each situation that they learned a great deal from a tabletop exercise. And what they learned was what they didn't know. And by doing tabletop exercises, it prepares your executives and people that are making decisions. They don't have to do it on the fly. They have already experienced some of these situations and have learned how to solve those problems. For instance, if a company has their building burned down and their IT department is in that building, is there another building that they can switch called a hot site with an IT system that has a backup, and they can continue their business? So a business continuity plan that incorporates all of these things is extremely valuable, and every company should do a emergency response plan. OSHA 198 says that any company that has over 10 employees has to have an emergency response plan. And it's amazing how many companies we come into contact with that don't have that. So I hope that Rick and I have imparted some beneficial information. Again, Talon Companies is consisted of the convergence of physical security with IT security. We have a staff of IT people that were former NSA, and they know their business. I'll leave you with a book that I would recommend that everybody read called The Perfect Weapon. And it's an amazing book that talks about cybersecurity and the coming issues dealing with countries that are using cyber attacks. So thank you very much for listening today.
So long.